Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast, where we try to shine a spotlight on stories about local grassroots soccer culture here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the country and around the world. I'm John Cross, the founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing? You must be doing exceptionally well this
Yes,
particular episode.
it's been a good week for Dylan and for Spurs fans of all stripes. It was a magical day last Wednesday. I was at Fair Play with a lot of my friends that I've met over the years through San Diego Spurs and Sal's follow up San Diego Spurs. I think he calls it Finest City Spurs, something like that. Anyway, everybody's at Fair Play these days, so there was. I actually don't know, but it was packed. It was. I think
I
I
saw
think,
some pictures.
yeah, Shane even told me that he was a little surprised by how many people were there. So the emotions were high, the crowd was lively, and it was a really good time. And yeah, bad season, bad game, but at the end of the day, I don't think really anyone's going to remember any of that. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was a really nice vindication of some of us Spurs fans who have been a little more sympathetic to Ange Postecoglou as a manager and as a person. And I talked a little bit about it a couple of weeks ago, but I think very highly of him as a person, first and foremost, but also as a manager. And so for him to do this thing that no matter what happens next, makes him a legend in Spurs lore. The same thing for Sonny. Finally seeing him lift a trophy was just massively vindicating. So yeah, it's been a really good week. I didn't get a lot of work done last week, if I'm being super honest. Sorry if my boss is watching this. I don't doubt it, but hey, thanks for watching. But yeah, so it's been fun. They got thumped on Sunday, and I didn't even really care. I was just out celebrating.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been a good time.
So that's good. How about any of the other promotion playoffs? Do you happen to catch any of those or have
I
any
did
interest or
actually.
didn't care because Spurs won?
Well, I cared a little less, but no, I did. I unfortunately slept through most of the championship playoff final, which I was really the one I was most jazzed for. Um, but it looked like it was a great game. I caught the end, so obviously the most dramatic part. And I'm so happy to see Sunderland come up. I don't have any strong feelings about Sunderland as a club. I've never actually watched Sunderland till I die, though I probably should do that. But I enjoy their rivalry with Newcastle. I think that's one of the better rivalries the Premier League has seen in the time I've paid attention. They have some players I really like, some ex-Spurs Academy graduates. And I didn't want to see Sheffield United finish 20th again next season. I'm so tired of them watching them fire a manager, hire Chris Wilder, finish 20th, and do it all over again. So it's nice to get somebody else up. And then I did get to watch the League One final, which didn't go the way I'd hoped. Leyton Orient, I've always had a soft spot for just because they're another London club that I know had fallen on some hard times. And actually, Harry Kane specifically had kind of stepped in and helped them financially. And they have a couple Spurs loanees that I think very highly of in Jamie Donnelly and Josh Keeley. So, it was a bummer to see them lose. But that's experience. So, and good for, I think it was Charlton, right? Who, are a bit of a sleeping giant of a club. So good to see them headed back to the championship. And then the League Two final, I love watching League Two because it reminds me of some of those really just not high quality, but very entertaining USL games we used to get where you get 6-7 headers in a row or whatever, or old days MLS kind of thing,
Yeah.
So League Two is a lot of that, and it was really nice to see AFC Wimbledon win. They're a club
Yes.
we've probably touched on, and if we haven't, definitely will at some point. So yeah, it's anyway, this just turned into a longer ramble than I planned, but yeah, it was a good weekend of football, I will say. It was fun watching those clubs. Three fan bases, I think, really deserving of it. So
Yeah. As a neutral, certainly enjoyed it. Watched a lot of those promotion playoff
mhm.
games this weekend. As well, happy to see AFC Wimbledon, certainly in light of the whole backstory of that club and MK Dons, to see them back into League One, right? It's not the first time they've been in League One, but hopefully they can continue their rise. But nice to see a fan owned club,
Absolutely.
right? Be able to rise and go up through the ranks, especially in this day and age. I was, I guess, extra happy, more relieved. I didn't realize how much I, I think I said a few episodes back, because my dad's team was Bradford FC or Bradford City. And I, kind of loosely follow them, but I really started to get more invested at the end of the season. And it was really relaxing to be able to watch the League Two playoffs, knowing that Bradford City had already clinched their automatic spot with their dramatic victory on the last game of the season. So that was, I found myself a little more invested than I thought I would be over those. So it was fun. And especially in light of some other things that we'll talk about in this episode a little bit later. So I'll loop back around to Bradford City in another segment. But there was a lot of kind of reconnecting to some of my past with some podcasts and other episodes and things I'd heard, along with that being my dad's club and then watching it, and so it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
So,
those games definitely are a little easier to enjoy when you don't have a real vested stake in it.
yeah. So something that sneaked up on me that I hadn't really seen anything about to today. Do you know what today is the 10-year anniversary of in terms of, I guess, FIFA World Soccer?
I don't, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's a Department of Justice investigation, which basically led to Blatter's ouster and Jack Warner's, all the stuff dealing with the corruption in FIFA. And it was funny reading some of the articles today, how like that was intended, supposed to be, everybody thought would be a pivotal moment in the history of FIFA and rooting out corruption. And looking back on that event 10 years later, one, I can't believe 10 years has passed. And I don't know about you, but to me, I'm thinking, I'm not sure how much has effectively really changed.
Oh
Maybe,
no, it's changed a lot, John. It's gotten way worse.
well, that's what I mean. Maybe some of the bribes and things are down, but the
I
the
would say
dealings
they've
of,
gotten bigger and more blatant. They're doing it out in the open now.
let's say, I would argue it feels like they're doing more behind closed doors and then just publicly saying, here's what we're doing.
I
That
suppose,
there's
yeah.
less voting and things going on. But yes, I can't say that world soccer is in a better place now after that. And frankly, as a lot of people pointed out, I'm not the first one to make this conclusion, but can you imagine right now a Department of Justice investigation into FIFA for any reason over the next few years? I mean,
I can actually,
just
but it would be something like not allowing Donald Trump to play in the final or something like that. So.
yeah, fair play to that. Yeah, that just caught me off guard. I didn't realize it had been that long. It
Yeah,
just,
I didn't either.
it's kind of some sad news. And when I look at, they're talking about the dynamic pricing that they're going to be using for the FIFA Club World Cup, and all these other political issues about streamlining visa requirements for people who are attending, but yet, kicking them out as quickly as possible as soon as the event is over. Not that I'm terribly invested in watching any of these at the moment. That's certainly my place right now as a soccer fan. I'm finding myself, I guess, personally distancing myself from these big major events that I always used to look forward to. I used to love, and now there's just such a bad taste in my mouth. I find it hard to get excited about any of these things.
Yeah, definitely. And the Club World Cup, especially this summer, I think we've talked about already how it feels like in a lot of ways they're kind of flubbing this opportunity to do something cool. And I've seen ticket prices, and I don't think those stadiums are going to have very many people in them. People will claim, oh, those expensive tickets are just resellers, but when it's the whole stadium, what difference does it make?
Right.
It's and yeah, I don't know. I'm so just, yeah, it's, I want to be excited about, the things happening in the United States, these great sporting events, the Olympics too. That used to
Right.
be like the biggest thing in my life when the Summer Olympics would roll around. When I was a kid, it was something like I'd look forward to for 4 years, and now
Yes.
like they're going to be up the road from me. And I'm kind of like, just not even that interested. And it's just a great shame. And, I was actually having, I don't know if you want to use this to kind of springboard into another conversation, but I was actually just having this conversation with somebody in regards to San Diego FC this weekend. That, like, I wish I cared, like I wish I cared, but I don't. And so, like, I wish I cared about the Club World Cup, but I don't. And I wish I was excited for the World Cup and the Olympics coming to the United States, but I'm not. And it's just a really unfortunate spot to be in because I'm like aware of this alternate reality where Dylan is very, very amped and saving a lot of money for these things, and now I just kind of don't
Right.
give a crap.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I remember in '84 when the LA hosted the Olympics. I was in high school. It was my between my junior and senior years. And I remember my grandparents, they got tickets to multiple events and went, and I was so jealous, that the two of them went, and they went and enjoyed. They went to the closing ceremonies. They didn't get the opening ceremonies because some of the big things, had just entered a draw, but there were some other events that they went to. But we were in Palm Springs, so they drove in and did, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 events over the 17 days. And I remember thinking then, if they ever come back in the US, and especially in a place where I'm close, like you said, it's just going to be up the road from us. Like, there's no way in the world I'm going to miss it. And now, I don't know. I don't feel the same way anymore, which is a shame. It used to be, and maybe that's the naivete of being young.
Yeah, I've been thinking that a lot lately. How I used to hear people say things like, "Oh, well, money is ruining sports," and as a kid, like, you're a little bit aware of what they mean by that. Um, but it's a little different when you're, actually confronted with all of these things as an adult. So, yeah, I think there's something to that.
Yeah, and you mentioned SDFC, and we're going to get into the weekend's events here in just a few minutes. But before we do that, we did have round 16 of the Open Cup. Right, we're coming into the quarterfinals, so we are already, I think, we're lamenting the last time we spoke about the Open Cup, how it's just we only had one USL team, one lower league team, happened to be from the USL Championship, that was left in the tournament, and how you especially, I think, said your excitement had really kind of waned for the Open Cup. Now it was just all MLS teams. I was maybe in a slightly different place, but now that we're down to the final 8 and we had the weekend. One, did you watch any games and anything stick out to you for some of the results? I have a couple of things I'll share after I give you a chance to go.
I watched a bit of the, I think it was Timbers versus Earthquakes. Let me see, I'm trying to find the fixture. So was that last round? No, yeah, I watched the Timbers versus Earthquakes the game. Not a great game. I paid attention to the Pittsburgh result, but obviously didn't go very well. So, no, I didn't pay that close of attention.
Yeah, I did catch quite a few of the matches. I did pay attention to the Pittsburgh results, but they were just outclassed by Philadelphia, clearly. And, we talked about this a little bit last time. Why, after previous years, so many USL teams doing much better and advancing further, why did the MLS teams kind of dominate this time around? And I think we alluded to it, that they took it a little more seriously, and it didn't occur to me at the time we had our conversation until I read something after our last podcast. And someone pointed out that because of the way MLS restructured things, and since not everybody's in the Leagues Cup, and Leagues Cup, I think, gets potential of 3 CONCACAF Champions Cup slots, then if you're out of the Leagues Cup, the Open Cup and MLS Cup are your chances to get in there. So, a lot more teams took it seriously, especially if they don't, it's harder to win the MLS Cup. You got to be the best of 30 teams, at least on the MLS side, you have fewer MLS teams in there. And if that is your tournament, that's the one you're going to try to shoot for to see if you can win. So I do think that overall, the Major League Soccer teams that participated in the Open Cup did take it more seriously, which I hope they always do.
Yeah.
But along those lines, I did watch. I was disappointed for us, a local connection, CJ Fodry for Austin. He came in later in the game and missed a sitter, like in front of the goal. Ball ricocheted back to him. Goalkeeper was on the ground. All he had to do was put it in a corner or lift it over the goalkeeper, and he basically kicked it right into the goalkeeper that was on the ground. So, really, I mean, it was a reaction kind of thing he had to do. There was not much time, but really, it was a sitter and should have scored. So I was disappointed for him that he wasn't able to get that. But to bring up some USL news, I don't know if you saw the DC United Charlotte match. I mean, it finished 2-2 after full time, 3-3 at the end of extra time. So they go to penalty kicks. Now, they go 5 rounds of penalty kicks, but DC United wins 2-1. I'm not sure I've seen it at a professional level, maybe at a youth level, but I'm not sure I've seen at a professional level a round of penalty kicks go 5 rounds and one team win 2-1. And that was because for DC United, they brought in Jordan Farr, that we knew very well from, at least with the Loyal. He was playing for San Antonio at that time. And he came in to be their goalkeeper for the penalty kicks, made 4 saves.
Wow.
I'm not sure I've ever seen anybody make 4 saves. It's nearly impossible to make 4 saves in 5 rounds of penalty kicks unless something's happening on the other end. And the other keeper made a couple of saves as well. So that was like, I just don't think I've ever seen that in my life. In 5 rounds of penalty kicks, a keeper even have the opportunity to make 4 saves. Because if you make 2 saves, your team is probably winning the penalty kick shootout, and you're probably winning before you even get to 5. But the fact that he saved 4 penalties, absolutely incredible. And he he guessed right and read them well. They weren't horrible penalty kicks. They weren't the best, but he was right. I think the one that went in was the only one he went the wrong way, if I remember correctly. But the others obviously went the right way because he saved him.
Well, he's clearly done his homework then.
Yeah, and they brought him in specifically for that, and he did it. So that was fun to watch. I've never really.
I think I may have seen a 2-1 penalty shootout finish before, but it was because of like really bad penalties, not because somebody made 4 saves. I couldn't tell you what game that was either. But just for our stat nerds viewers, if you just assume a base 80% of penalties are scored, that's about accurate. There's a 0.16% chance of saving 4 penalties out of 5. Which is
especially at a high level. That's crazy.
Absurdly low. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So for the quarterfinal matchups, I mean, we don't have to go through all of them. Anything standing out? Any storylines, or you're
Let me
done
pull them
now?
Up real quick. I've looked, but I don't have it off the top of my head. So here.
All right. I will mention one of them. You have Minnesota and Chicago, or Chicago at Minnesota, and I think, if I remember correctly from the draw, Minnesota is the team that potentially gets home field advantage all the way through. Because when they did the draw, they did who potentially hosts next round, and then they picked between East and West, and Minnesota ended up in the West. But which would host the final, the West team or the East team? So I think Minnesota is the one that has arguably the easiest path because they're guaranteed 3 home matches if they win the first 2. Some teams won't get any home matches, and Chicago might be one of them. But Chicago is still that team. It could be the first team in the modern era to win 5 Open Cup titles. So I'm loosely curious about that, but not terribly invested. Otherwise, I'm not really sure. There's no big draw for me. I don't really follow any of the teams closely. I don't really see anything that terribly stands out for me as in terms of a super interesting storyline. I think it's going to have to wait till the final for me to kind of
Yeah.
see what it looks like.
Yeah, I would agree. Nothing really jumping out at me. So, is what it is.
Yeah. So we also have the Jägermeister Cup. We had a game this last weekend. I don't know if you caught that. That was Indy 11, and I think won Knoxville. But our big weekend of Jägermeister Cup matches should be coming up this weekend. So you won't have the normal schedule of USL 1 and USL Championship. They'll all be, I think all of them will be Jägermeister Cup matches this weekend. So after that, after all teams should have at least 2 games of the 4 completed, we should have a better idea of how things are playing or are shaping up. And I still don't have a grasp of how this logistically plays out. These groups of 6 or 7, and you're only playing 4 matches. When I look right now at the standings, and it's deceiving because you've got Las Vegas Lights in their group. They've played 2 matches already and won both of them. So they're at 6 points. They seem like they're almost a lock. But they could lose the next 2 matches, and it could get really crazy towards the end. And same thing with Indy 11. They're sitting there at 6 points out of 2 matches. And since everybody else only has 1 match, or most of the other teams have 1 match, they're all so low on points. It's really hard to get a read on how things are going. I think it's going to have to, maybe even get through the 3rd round to kind of see how things are shaping up for that final round robin play. And I still haven't decided if I like this format or not. I'm going to have to wait and see. I don't know if just a straight up knockout would be better or not, but I'll give it a chance and see.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how we were both skeptical of the new league format in the European competitions and how it's worked out really well. So we'll see. Maybe it will be a little chaotic going into the final day, but that can be fun. So I don't know.
And then in National Amateur Cup news, they're still in the qualifications in the regions. Region 1 is the only one that has their final set, and that's with the New York Pan-Cyprian Freedoms, and they're playing Christos FC, so New York against Maryland. And that final will take place on June 14th, which a lot of big things happening on June 14th this year. That's going to be a busy day for people. But Region 2 is also, they'll be wrapping up. I think they have a game tomorrow night, which will wrap up their 2nd round, and then they'll be jumping into the quarterfinals for that. So we'll keep you updated on those teams and which teams might make it through. And we're still Region 3. It's difficult to find news on what's happening, and they're supposed to be sorting out their tournament here over the next couple of months. And Region 4 has closed their applications, but I can't find anything anywhere on what teams have applied, what teams have been accepted, what the tournament looks like, although the tournament's supposed to be played, in a month. So I don't know. We'll keep you updated on those things because again, the winner of this National Cup gets an automatic berth in next year's Open Cup. All right, and then the other thing on the women's side, we finally, and this sneaked up on me as well, the Brandy Chastain Cup, is I really thought when I heard about this in February and March, this was going to take place late summer, but they actually had one of the semifinal matches last week on Wednesday or Thursday. The other semifinal match will happen, I think, in a couple weeks, and then they haven't set the final yet. So I've been excited about this because, again, for those who are not familiar, the idea behind this Brandy Chastain Cup is supposed to be the wedge, kind of the door that opens up to a women's Open Cup. And you had teams, let me pull it up here, from the UWS, which is United Women's Soccer. You had a team representing the WPSL, a team from the USLW, and last year's National Amateur Cup champions, which is Pan World Elite. So Pan World Elite hosted California Storm last week. California Storm from the WPSL won that 4-1. So they will be playing in the finals. And then sometime soon, the New England Mutiny and the Richmond Ivy will be playing in the other semifinal match. So I'm both excited about this as a potential for a women's Open Cup, which really it's criminal that this hasn't happened yet. I mean, we really ought to have this. But it's been frustrating that even in this first year, and they branded it, there's no website for it. It's so hard to find information. I had to dig and dig and dig to find the result. I wanted to watch the game last week, and they said whoever was hosting it would live stream it. And I went to Pan World Elite's web pages. I looked in YouTube. I couldn't find it anywhere. So, it's hard to promote your event and really grow this tournament when people who want to find information about it or actually want to watch the matches can't figure out how to get there. So that's been very, very disappointing.
Yeah, that's it's too bad, especially with how accessible streaming and kind of information distribution systems are these days. You'd think that would be a higher priority.
All right, well, wrapping up that, let's get into our San Diego news. And this is, I would say, something when Dylan and I look and plan ahead for some of these and talk about what we're going to do on the shows, certainly was not an topic that we were looking to discuss. And because of the events that would happen post-match at the SDFC match, I would say I was the one who pushed to talk about this because it's really been bothering me, and probably been bothering me more than other news stories because of my history in the formation of the supporters union. So it's been on my mind for so many different reasons. But before we get into talking about the specifics of what happened this weekend and what potentially happens moving forward, I think a lot of this was on my mind because I told Dylan I listen to a lot of different podcasts when I'm working in the yard or doing things around the house. And one of my favorites, I don't listen to every episode because it doesn't grab me, but it constantly pulls me back because I have episodes that really speak to me, was What It Was podcast with Rob Draper and Jonathan Wilson. And we've talked about this podcast before because we did our own review of the 3-part series they did on the early history of U.S. soccer. And I was just going to mention this at the end of this show, just as a recommendation to go and listen to, because it specifically dealt with a period in time of world soccer, the 84-85 season in England, and fan hooliganism. And really that was like that year was kind of the apex of when things really went bad. Now, Hillsborough still wouldn't happen for a few years, but so many things happened in that year that started a lot of the changes that we see today that I think for anybody who's newer to soccer just takes for granted, but also how violently bad the hooliganism problem was, and how frankly, for a lot of people growing up at the time, it was just accepted. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. So the first thing I just want to get out there is, if you're not familiar with the podcast, I strongly recommend it. It Was What It Was is the name of the podcast. The hosts are Rob Draper and Jonathan Wilson. And this was a 2-part series that they did, and it was just released last week. So the first part really focuses on some key events on the 84-85 season, culminating with the Bradford Fire, which wasn't a result of hooliganism at all. But if you go back and listen to the podcast, they do make a strong case for why that's included, because part of the problem with the hooliganism at the time was not just the fan violence and not just the people involved. Certainly they are responsible for their own behaviors and they make their choices. But there's all kinds of external factors that helped create the environment that led to these awful situations that happened where people got hurt, and eventually we're talking about people getting killed. And again, for me, we mentioned at the beginning of the show, Bradford FC was my dad's club, and frankly, the Bradford Fire, my dad brought that up to the news. That was the first time my dad ever told me about that was the team he followed. My dad's from England. He grew up here mostly, since he was 16, and he didn't really talk too much about his growing up in England or what he did. It's like pulling teeth was getting information out of my dad. So that was a soccer connection, and always piqued my interest then about Bradford City. Not enough to follow them like it was my team, but and that fire I've always been, I don't want to say fascinated by that. That's the wrong word, but deeply moved by what happened at the grounds and what led to the events of the Bradford fire, which they do a good job explaining it in the podcast. That's not really what we're here to do. But an unfortunate situation where so many people needlessly died. Right? It should have never have happened. But it gets into greed and some other things that were also some of these outlying factors that helped contribute to the hooliganism problem. So that was on my mind. The Bradford thing, the Bradford fire, the hooliganism, listening to these episodes, and remember growing up as, I was in high school at this time. So that was the end of my, 84, 85. That would have been the end of my junior year. So yeah, I guess I said for the Olympics, it was my junior. I guess that would have been the summer between my sophomore and junior years. So this season, 84, 85 was my junior year. And it's, I remember a lot of it because just following the news and I love soccer, so trying to hear about it, but it was one of those things that also, I think, helped keep soccer from being terribly popular. I think a lot of people were happy when the NASL shut down in 84 for fear of hooliganism spreading and causing problems in the US. And it's, living through the times and the awful, horrendous stories of those times is, just having that fresh on my mind and then having the events happen after Saturday really bothered me, and I think bothered me in such a way that I had a vested interest in helping start the union, and I think some anger and disappointment because the writing was on the wall that this could be a potential problem a year ago, and and certainly not with everybody involved or all people or even a majority of people in any particular group, but it's I would argue, based on my experience, the culture or that type of environment was, by certain members of the front office, was strongly cultivated. And this is kind of, I don't know, you get to the fuck around and find out phase, right? This is, you wanted things for marketing and you wanted this and you turned, and look the other way when some other things were happening so you could still get your marketing stuff, and now here we are having conversations about fan violence. And frankly, I don't know if you've seen the videos and stuff, Dylan. We talked a little bit. You said you'd seen some, but lucky, and I know they said this on Two Balls and a Mic last night on their podcast, but lucky that someone didn't fall over that railing.
And was anybody seriously hurt? Has that been confirmed, or?
There has not been a whole lot confirmed about
this at all.
There was some
brutal shit in some of those videos I saw.
Yeah. And I do not have Instagram or TikTok or anything, and I have had some things shared with me, but certainly have not been privy to a lot of things that I'm sure are out there. But it's, well, go ahead. I'm going to give you a chance to jump in. I don't want to monopolize the whole thing here, but I have a couple of comments I want to make.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very plugged in, so I don't have a whole lot of info, but I've kind of, like I said, I was around Footstock this weekend, which was the day after this all happened. So I was kind of hearing talk, and I've seen some videos, and now that you pointed out, yeah, they are very lucky nobody went toppling over that rail, because it's not a very tall rail, and there were people being tackled downstairs and stuff. There was one video in particular I saw up close, somebody getting tackled down, a flight of stairs, which I hope everybody's okay, but that seems like the kind of thing that could get somebody killed, even if they're not going over the railing.
Right.
Saw a
paralyzed.
video of an SDFC fan using a belt as a whip. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, it's just embarrassing. Like it's embarrassing. And I was, I heard, I don't know the details of this, but I heard tell that it was all over a flag or banner or something, and someone was telling me that like this is like the most grown ass immature game of capture the flag that has ever fucking existed. And I thought that was a really apt way of explaining it, because it's like you're putting everything, like not only your life but your dignity, your club's dignity, your group's dignity, all of that at risk. Obviously, your life's the most important one. I'm just saying that there are other things, but all of that at risk for what exactly?
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a big question, for what exactly. And I have always said, on the one hand, I'm going to say basically two opposite things here a little bit. On the one hand, not here to tell anybody how to fan, right? And what to do. But on the other hand, I will strongly speak up when I think um, things things aren't going the way they should be. And not that my way is right, but if I feel strongly about something, I'm going to speak up about something. And I strongly believe there's no place for violence in sports, and especially sport fandom. Now, some people strongly believe that's part of the culture, right? And, you know, again, kind of like what you said, I would argue, why? And why does it have to be? Because it doesn't. Violence is a choice. You don't have to choose violence. You choose violence because you want to choose violence, especially when you're the initial aggressor, right? So there's a difference between defending. I mean, people want to jump in things. Well, what about defending yourself? Yeah, you can split hairs all kinds of different ways. But ultimately, any situation you're in, you have a choice how you want to respond. And if your first choice or go-to choice is violence or threats or harassment or bullying or intimidation, then that is a choice you're making. And I would argue we don't need that in the sport anywhere. Other people would argue differently. They would say that's just, as I think someone in the chat put it from last night's Two Balls and a Mic, that's just part of the cultural heritage. As one, I would argue it's absolutely not part of the cultural heritage just because it's happened sometimes before. And even because 40 years ago, it might have been a bigger problem due to other environmental situations. That doesn't make it part of the heritage that gets passed down like tradition from generation to generation. But there are some people who strongly believe like that is part of the whole thing, defending your turf. But again, but why? Why does it have to be that way? And the answer is it doesn't. It is a choice. And I think the union is I think they're in a very difficult position. I know a lot of the people who are in the leadership in the union, since I was heavily involved. I've been out of the loop for 6 months, so a little more than 6 months. So I don't know, the conversations and what's directly going on. So I want to make that absolutely clear. But to me, I think the thing that bothers me most is listening to some of the comments and like, where does the union go from here? Because what I saw in the chat, especially in Two Balls and a Mic, and what I've seen in some of the Discord chatter, is basically people digging in on both sides. One side, this is stupid. Why are we even doing this? Like, you guys are idiots. And other people saying, then leave if you don't want to be part of the culture. There's people digging into their positions and then challenging each other. And that, as I don't care which side you're on, what you think, if you just think like my way is the right way, you're going to destroy the union either way. And I think that's probably what bothers me, is that there's so much potential here for this union and the representation of San Diego. And as I always said when I was president, like, there's always a path forward. There's a path forward to be very passionate and very exuberant in the things you do and cultivate some of those supporter groups that individuals hold in high esteem. but it doesn't mean you have to do everything. Like there's certain, I'll just use as some examples, some South American supporter groups that people love. They watch the videos, it's amazing. But if you understand those particular groups, they operate like a mob and the mafia. So yes, you may love what happens in the stadium, but does that mean you also want the mob part of it? And the lawlessness and everything else that goes with it and the intimidation. I and I don't think you have to have both. I
No.
don't think you have to have violence. Frankly, I don't think you have to be enemies with your other supporter groups. I think that is one of the stupidest things. And to me, it gets back to if you are leadership in MLS, you kind of want those little fights going around and have people do their big displays because it makes for great marketing, because they like to use the supporters in terms of the marketing. And it's better for them. But if all the supporters across the league actually unified and got on the same page and put pressure on the league to demand some changes, they could affect change. But they'll never affect change if they're fighting each other all the time. Then it's just, about my little bit of turf. And I'm really concerned because I'm not sure anybody in the group is at a place where they can, I'll say, talk about compromise. I did a session with our leaders back last summer and talking about compromise, the difference between compromise and negotiation, my definitions of the term. And negotiation is where you kind of meet halfway, like you haggle on a price. Someone starts at one price, you offer a lower price, and you meet halfway. And like, okay, both people maybe not necessarily happy, but you got a deal done. Whereas looking at compromise from the perspective of understanding what's really important to people and what people are willing to move on and what fears they have that if certain changes implemented. I know for the people who maybe are proposing, like, this is strong culture, we have to be this way, we have to defend our turf, go and steal flags, trapos, whatever, and give payback to people who do that to us. I know if some of the people, not everybody, but some people are in that camp, they're afraid that if you move too far towards the other end of the spectrum, and I do not mean this as a knock on Wave, but I think there's a lot of people who look and see the support that happens at the Wave, and they're like, that's not for me. I don't want that. And I know in their mind, they're afraid that it's going to get watered down and they won't be able to express themselves, which is a fear they have. Now, does that mean you have to have violence? Of course not. But it's these, again, I think, and I told Dylan ahead of time, I think I had to have this little section of the podcast to get some things off my chest because it's just, it has bothered me for days. I cannot stop thinking about it. It's the first time in 6 months where I felt like I wanted to be back in the middle of some of these conversations. And because I'm afraid those conversations aren't happening and aren't going to be productive. And it could be, the effective end of this supporters union. And it really depends how the club handles it. And, I am going to be very interested to see what the sanctions are, what comes down from MLS, and how the club actually handles this. Because like I said, and I will stand by this, it's my opinion, but there are members of the front office who have actively cultivated this. And my expectation, I told this to people in the fall as I was leaving, this is what you need to watch out for, because when that happens, I fully expect we'll see what happens here this week or next week, whenever, the results of these sanctions come out. But I fully expect some of those same members of the club to throw the union leadership under the bus and say, why didn't you control your people? When they were the ones encouraging this kind of behavior. And I would say strong arming union leadership to be permissive of certain types of behaviors. And because that's what I saw on my end. I mean, literally someone in a meeting saying, don't be stupid and get caught, kind of thing. especially when you're outside the stadium or doing something, whatever it was. So there was a permissive culture there. And for union leadership people, because of the way it's structured as an actual nonprofit corporation, anybody who's been voted on the board, like, they're in a precarious position right now. If they do not uphold the law, basically, with their memberships, and they are permissive and allow some, and someone gets hurt, like, they're legally responsible. And I don't think some people who are sitting there on the board realize that. It's a tough situation, and I'm not sure where it goes from here. There's some strong feelings people have out there, and very divisive stuff, and frankly, a lot of bullying and harassment by some members towards others, and especially this idea of, like, don't snitch. Like, if you have to encourage people not to snitch, you're doing something wrong, right?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, you're doing something wrong. There shouldn't be anything you can't be transparent about. I mean, that should be a clue to yourself to just stop and think for a second about what's going on.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I think I mentioned this when we talked earlier, but I've come around in my adult years. I think I'm decidedly, pro snitching, generally speaking. Obviously, I think there's certain circumstances where you maybe make exceptions to the rule, but almost 99% of the time, I'd say the whole "don't snitch" kind of mantra serves to protect people who have done things wrong, and it sort of implicitly acknowledges the wrongdoing in the sort of statement. So it's silly. I found it silly for a long time, and it's not just silly; it's harmful. And I think it's also, I understand the, like, protecting the turf of, like, this is, our city. We want to represent our city. But I think it's really ironic that, they've taken this idea of, like, the protection of turf that you might see in, like, Buenos Aires, when you have, like, people from La Boca, like, taking it very seriously when somebody sliced Boca Juniors, is not the same thing as the fucking media franchise that is San Diego FC. Like, don't get me wrong, like, I understand the wanting to defend your city or whatever, but to me, it's just unbelievably silly that people, like, are so defensive of a corporation, like, that doesn't give a flying fuck about them. But I also kind of see how it's not really about that. But I also wanted to say, too, that if you want to represent our city or your city, I'm a transplant, whatever, fine. If you want to represent your city, is this how you do that? Is this how you make your city look good? I have to say, I have some thoughts on San Diego's sporting fandom culture that I generally keep to myself because, like I said, I'm a transplant. But one thing that I've always found pretty silly that people will say a lot without ever really elaborating on when they talk about, San Diego getting new teams. They talked about this before SDFC came vis-a-vis soccer. They talk about it with an NBA team and an NHL team. They say San Diego as a city, as a sporting city, deserves this. They'll say, we deserve more teams. And my response to that has pretty much always been, I don't really agree with that, but I also don't know what criteria you are using because, like I said, they tend not to elaborate. But my response at this point is, I actually don't think so, because the Padres are great. They have an excellent fan base, the packed house almost every night, but they don't tolerate this kind of shit, right? Like, they wouldn't. MLB as a league doesn't. And I think that if you are an SDFC supporter and you are somebody who wants to represent your city, you want to prove that San Diego deserves this and better things, right? In a sporting capacity, fucking prove it, I guess would be my answer. Fucking act like it, because going and seeking out violence is like amateur hour juvenile nonsense. And just because it happens, like you said, just because it's happened in the past or happens elsewhere doesn't, like, make it inherently a good thing. So yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not super plugged in. I don't know a lot of these people really. But I'm a little embarrassed for San Diego, honestly. They've played 15 games. They've had 7 or 8 home games. A quarter of them have been marred by, like, at least bare minimum extremely offensive incidents. Um,
Right.
so again, I guess I would say like if San Diego is such a great sporting fandom city, which it can be, then we should act like it.
Agreed. And I want to make one last comment about kind of the idea of snitching. There, I would say a predominant feeling among supporters here in San Diego is a very anti-cop attitude, anti-authority, anti-police. And one of the things, one of the biggest complaints is about when something happens, especially with law enforcement closing ranks and not turning anybody in and not divulging information or mysteriously saying, I don't know, I didn't see what happened, but basically closing ranks and protecting their own. That is a fundamental concern I think a lot of supporters in this union have with law enforcement. I would say a valid concern. But if you approach this, and this is what I would hope everybody in the union individually thinks for themselves, if you are promoting this idea of don't snitch, don't tell, you have to have our back, you are no better than these law enforcement groups that you claim all cops are bastards and everything else. Like, you're no better than them. You are equally as bad as they are if this is what you are doing. If you are choosing to protect and close ranks when people are, you know, I said this to someone the other day, committing a crime. They're like, oh, there wasn't a crime. Like, yes, it's assault. Like, and there's battery. There's all these things happening. It is a crime. It shouldn't be happening. There is no excuse. The arguments people are using are the same arguments we hear about using homophobic or racial slurs in sport. Oh, it's just part of the sport. It's boys will be boys, man. It's the heat of the moment. Okay, maybe, but it doesn't have to be. It can be different. And are you willing to stand up and be that change and be that difference? Or are you going to look the other way? Because I know there's people like this in the union, which frustrated me at the time when I was there. Are you going to look the other way when something bad happens because you're afraid it's going to hurt your VIP status with the club, or it's going to hurt your ability to go to games personally? That I'll call it selfishness, your selfishness to still enjoy this, or you think whatever's happening over here doesn't affect you personally and you still want to enjoy it, that you're willing to look the other way when bad things happen. I mean, this is like the Me Too movement and everything. Like, these are the same problems in all of these things that people in social media get all upset and complain about, that I don't trust cops and I don't, these people in power. And we're seeing the same behavior from many. I don't know if it's majority, I don't know how many, but many people within the union who are advocating basically closing ranks and protecting your own. And I will say, if you look at it from both, you're no better than any of these groups if you choose that path. You need to choose a better path. And you need to make a support. You don't have to lose the passion ever. You don't have to lose any of that. But you can do that without the violence, and you can make an inclusive, welcoming section to people and not a gatekeeping section. That frankly, and this is certainly not the majority of supporters out there, I want to be absolutely clear, but for some people, that supporter group and that mentality is a cover for just being an asshole. Right? It's protection. I can't drink as much as I want to in my normal life. I certainly can't do it where I work. I can't behave like this anywhere else. But in these couple hours, I can. I can get overly intoxicated and I have cover for being an absolute asshole because someone over here has my back, and I could just be an absolute jerk to people. And again, that's not everybody, but it is some people. And I think that needs to be acknowledged within the union, and they need to figure out how they're going to solve that. Because it doesn't matter really what the club or MLS does. If the union wants to continue and be strong, they have to figure this out internally, what they're going to do. And I'm afraid that they're not at a place where they can do it. And I'm not certain, but I haven't been around enough, that they're not saying I would be able to do it. I want to be clear about that also, but I'm not really sure there's a leader right now that has the cash to pull everything together. So, and, it's going to depend on what the club wants. They want to continue cultivating this, behind the scenes, but on the surface saying, no, 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 we don't accept it. We'll see. It's going to be interesting. And it's, I think, as I said before, I think it's bothered me more as someone who put in a lot of time to help get this started and grow and had to step away for health reasons, to see what looks like from the outside, seeing things really devolving rapidly. And the signs were there a year ago that this was a path this group could take. I think there were, again, too many people that, for selfish reasons, were afraid to lose their VIP treatment, that they were willing to look the other way. For some of them, just kind of go for the ride. Frankly, here I'm getting a little upset, but it's the same fucking thing we see in our politics and life right now of people, awful shit is happening and some people are just turning a blind eye to it because they don't think it's going to affect them. And that's what I see going on. And I just, like I said, I think I just had to get that off my chest so I personally could move on. And I'll take all the hate mail, hate whatever comments that people are willing to send my way, but it's it's a problem that needs to be sorted, certainly.
Yeah. Kind of ancillary to the main point here, but I did also just want to say before we move on from this topic, and apologies, there's loud sirens going by here. Yeah. I just wanted to say shout out to Snapdragon Stadium Security for completely just letting this happen, even though there's a lot of other problems underlying here. I have always thought Snapdragon Stadium Security was awful, whether it be understaffed or just fundamentally not interested in doing their jobs. Look, they're probably working for minimum wage. I don't blame them for not getting involved in this stuff, but Snapdragon Stadium Security has pretty much been a joke since the stadium opened, and I'm very unsurprised that something like this was allowed to happen. So shout out to them for doing a terrible job there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think once the investigation comes out, and who knows how much MLS will share, how transparent they will be, which I think is another fundamental problem when you lack transparency. Then it just leads to rumors and I don't know what's going on. I've heard some of the same things you've heard. It started with the stealing of a Trapo by supposedly the Galaxy fans when the Union was up at that opening match up in Carson. But I don't know. I have no idea if that's true. I don't know, other than the pictures and being able to recognize face, like, oh, yeah, know that face, or seeing people actually wearing, supporter group names, shirts, which, not necessarily like someone could have a shirt that's not actually in the supporter group, but there's certain supporter groups that control that very tightly. You can't just buy a shirt kind of thing. So will be interesting. The Union as a union is in a bad. Some people think they're in a perfect spot. Some people are happy to become legends out of this and get suspended. Like that would make their day, right? But in terms of the Union and having something that represents San Diego, it's in a bad spot, and people are going to have to step up and make their voices heard if they want to help shape that story. But that's, I think, been part of the history of the Union also, is not enough people have been willing to step up and speak up, just kind of go along for the ride. And this is the ride, and this is where it's headed. Now, whether the ride changes is entirely up to the people of the Union and how they want to move forward.
I will say too, I obviously don't spend a whole lot of time perusing MLS spaces, but my impression is that the rest of the league supporters groups don't take the San Diego Supporters Union very seriously. A big part of that is the TIFOs, and I recognize that there's probably a lot of reasons why they ended up the way they are. But between the homophobic chanting, now this, I think a lot of people's impression is that the union has very little control over what actually goes on in that section, which, maybe is a little bit true. So anyway.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to follow and see. So we're kind of at a point here where our main focus of our show is actually we're going to talk about Wrexham. Do you got a few minutes? Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, sure, we can.
And do this. We'll maybe truncate it a little bit and pick up the rest of the story later. When we had originally talked about this for this particular episode and talk about the Wrexham Phenomenon, it was partly, well, I mean, anybody who's followed both Wrexham the Club and the Welcome to Wrexham documentary series, you know the history, you know what's going on. I don't think it's too surprising, and I hope we're not ruining or spoiling anything for anybody at this point, especially the people who might listen to our podcast. But it's not so much when Wrexham is playing, but every time the Welcome to Wrexham documentary series starts up again, I feel like there's this new wave of, I'll say critics of Wrexham, but really talking about the Wrexham phenomenon and whether this is a good thing for soccer or a bad thing for soccer. And I think those are dangerous phrases when people say, do you think it's a good thing or do you think it's a bad thing? Well, I don't know. What do you mean by good and what do you mean by bad? When you don't narrow that parameter down very much, sometimes you get people arguing and debating, having two complete different conversations with each other. So we thought maybe we'll try to tackle this just a little bit and talk about this idea of Wrexham, the Wrexham phenomenon, because it's unique right now in sports, right? There's nothing like this Wrexham story, partly because they have two Hollywood owners that have, I will use the words effectively leveraged their fame and celebrity status to do more for a particular club than other people would be able to do. But I think what it comes down to is you get a lot of people who they're less upset with Wrexham the team, but more upset with Wrexham the content, and then the growing number of new fans coming in that just want to go visit Wrexham and want to take in a game, but maybe don't become diehard fans or long-term fans. And again, to kind of go back to our previous conversation a little bit with the union, to me, that always comes off a little bit as gatekeeping. Like you're not a real fan. And it always comes back for me, like everybody had to start somewhere. Like their door started somewhere. They weren't born a rabid soccer fan. We all have our story and our journey. And I find it, I will say, bemusing when I think when people get so worked up about the Wrexham story. So you can kind of see where I land on this a little bit. Dylan, what's your just big overall take on
I mean,
Wrexham?
I tend to agree with you. I'd probably even take it further. I think that Wrexham has like unequivocally been one of the best things in the last 5 years for like visibility of soccer to the general public in the United States. And I like to use my mom as an anecdote. She is a sports fan. Baseball's her jam. She likes football too, and basketball to an extent. And she would like watch soccer with me once I started paying more attention to it. But she never like really cared until this show. And she and my dad will like watch Wrexham games now. And maybe a lot of people say, well, that's exactly the kind of fan I'm complaining about. And to them, I say, fuck you. That's my mom. So but the point being that like, who cares? What like. Let people enjoy things. It's literally the world's game.
Right.
So everyone in the world is entitled to it.
Right. And I always, again, it strikes me as odd people who want to control other people's behavior that has really zero bearing on their life.
Yeah.
And I guess you could argue, well, as some people did, Wrexham in the early years, National League, and a little bit League Two, they were overpaid. They had a high wage bill because they were trying to be promoted. And I would argue, so does every owner that comes in wants to take that team up to the next level. They invest. They basically purchase, in terms of a team and a wage bill and players and pay players for the level they want to be at, because that's how you get there, really. I think the difference is Ryan and Rob, through their documentary series, have been, I don't want to be careful how I say this. I'll say, just as an initial big picture pass, they've been very transparent about it. Now, that said, they are clearly storytellers, and clearly the documentary is not just, it's not Sunderland Till I Die, which is more a fly on the wall, what's going on. The Welcome to Wrexham documentary series is carefully crafted to tell some narrative stories, because that's what these people do, right? This is their expertise, and they're not just following it so you can see in real time from week to week what happens with the soccer team. They're getting people invested in the community, their own community invested in the community, right? And other people outside invested in the community, and helping raise up a community and using the team as a vehicle. And I don't think that's a bad thing. In fact, I think that's how you weather storms in the long run, is when you do that. And this community already had a strong connection to their team, so it was easier to come in and do that. But now that these owners clearly have invested in the community, now some people would argue, well, they're only doing it for the story. I don't think they're only doing it for the story, but I think they find good stories to tell, and they invest in them and tell the good stories. I think they both can be true, right? Not one or the other. So, and like you said, your mom watches it. I watch Welcome to Wrexham with my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law lives with us. And from that, she's in turn sat down to watch some soccer games with me when I watch soccer games. Because just like you said, she's never really interested, didn't understand the game. But now she understands things a little bit differently, and is very intrigued by a sporting situation environment that is very foreign to her, but is being presented in a way that's easily digestible. And again, like you said, I don't see anything wrong with that at all. Like, she watches NFL, and she doesn't really watch baseball or anything. NFL is probably the only thing she really watches. On her own, she'll have the TV on and watch a game. Definitely likes when it gets the playoffs and the Super Bowl. But she'll come down and sit and watch a little soccer and ask questions about it, is curious, wants to know more. And, sometimes I'll tell her, oh, Wrexham game's on. She'll come up and pop in, and she kind of gets bored a little bit. I don't think soccer is quite her speed, and it's not everybody's speed, but she is, I would say, fascinated by it. And a lot of that has to do with the way the documentary was presented, and especially fascinated now with the promotion relegation idea.
I think that's what I was going to say. Is I think more than really anything, it's helped kind of just give the average American sports fan like a basic understanding of what an open pyramid might look like. Because I've noticed this in like 15 years that I've really paid close attention to world soccer. I used to have to explain the kind of pyramid concept. And now I can just say clubs get promoted and relegated, and the vast majority of sports fans know what I mean by that. And so I think that that's a shift in the window, right? Like you're taking it down. And I wanted to say too that I think the complaints about, oh, they're just here to tell a story, first of all, is wrong. If you've watched the documentary at all, that's so obvious that isn't the case. Like, especially Rob, who wasn't quite as, superstar as Ryan Reynolds, and really still isn't, but even in like the first or second season, like, you can see that this has moved him and spoken to him in a way that really only his local Philly sports teams did before this.
Exactly.
And so I think that to level that accusation at them is fundamentally wrong. And I would guess that the people saying that haven't really watched the show, or at least given it a fair whack. But two, I want to say, even if that was true, what's so wrong with that? They're helping this community, this club, these fans, these people lift themselves up. This community and this club were on a path to a future they didn't recognize or necessarily want, right? And now this community and team, this town, like, have a newfound identity. So even if they had just done this to tell the story, I fail to see the issue with that, really, at all.
Right.
And then again, you layer back in the fact that these guys really clearly give a shit, like a lot. And that's one of the main selling points when I try to tell people to watch this documentary is, like, you will be surprised how little of it is about Rob and Ryan. It really is not about them, although it is sometimes, but it's about Wrexham. And yeah, so I don't think anybody's given me a good like any single good reason to dislike that show other than just like sour grapes. So
Well, and I'll have to admit, again, for anybody who possibly doesn't know, I have a bit of a bias because I do documentary storytelling as well. And, one of the criticisms I heard someone levy recently, and I can't remember who it was, but it was on a podcast or reading through, but this idea that, the content was there even before the buying of the team. The fact that they had cameras filming when they were doing their initial pitch to Wrexham. And, as someone who does like for my locals documentary, like I was there when they were, going through the bylaws and some of the other things. I asked, like, hey, can I come there? Because like you don't know where it's going to go, but you want to capture the moment because it could be something cool. I've had other things I've tried to do documentaries on where I have a ton of footage and it didn't end up being anything. It didn't end up being a story I wanted to tell. Right? And sometimes that happens, but you don't know. You don't know if it is. So you want to be able to catch those moments because they're crucial. And I have gone back because we knew we were going to start this. So I went back and did a rewatch. I haven't finished. I'm about season 8 or I'm sorry, episode 8 or 9 of the first season. And I'm amazed, kind of going along what you said, how prescient some of their comments were in the beginning and how much like they were all in about the community. And just like you said, especially for Rob, it reminded him of growing up as a kid and growing up in Philly and Philly sports teams. So he had it, and that's what he was looking for. He wasn't just looking for a cheap team to buy. It had to, for him, be the right team. And there's all these, like watching it now, going back to the first season and hearing some of the comments and knowing that they're going to be in the championship next year, just in a couple of months here, that, it's really interesting to see some of the naivete and some of the long-term vision and some of the things they wanted to do. I even watched the first episode of this new season. I don't like to watch the season until all the episodes are out, but I figured I should at least watch the first episode of the new season before we talked about this tonight. Yeah, and I think I get it. If this kind of documentary is not your thing, it feels too forced. It is forced, right? They tell things out of order because they're not just doing the chronological story of Wrexham. They're trying to tell something bigger and more than that. They're trying to sell people on the community of Wrexham and using the team as a vehicle for that. Because as we've seen with a larger fan base, being able to do US tours, bring in more money, they're able to bring in money based on their own net worth that they couldn't bring in, the other people the same net worth, wouldn't have the resources or the reach that they can do. So why not take advantage of it? And I get it if you have to compete against them. It probably seems horribly unfair. But I think there's a lot of lessons in there to learn as well. And something that we will probably talk about in the future, hopefully very soon, so to get kind of on the heels of this one. If you're not familiar with it, Dylan and I were talking about this after our show last week. There's a team called Dorking Wanderers, and there's been a group called the Bunch of Amateurs that have been following their rise up through the ranks of English football. And they're now in the National League, where Wrexham was when they started. But they've worked up, and I can't remember where they started, what step, but they've worked their way up through multiple promotions. And there's been a group documenting along the way, totally different style than Wrexham. Funny, right? Really more for, I'll stereotype here, a millennial generation. But shorter videos and, a little more raw and a little more into the grassroots culture of soccer and totally different experience. I love that one as well. I love that one as much as I love Welcome to Wrexham and as much as I loved Sunderland Till I Die. They're all very different vehicles, different styles of telling a story and different reasons for telling the story. Right? So I don't think any one of them is worse or better than the others just as a style. And frankly, if you're a group and a club and a community, why not leverage every resource you have And I think other teams are seeing this. They're seeing like what's happening at Wrexham is opening up some people's eyes to different ways they could try to tackle some problems. Take advantage of the talent you have within. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I think too that it's I fail to see what the difference is between Rob and Ryan like investing in this club and helping them up through the ranks. I fail to see how that's any different than any other rich person coming into any lower league club and trying to raise them up through the ranks. The only difference is that Rob and Ryan happened to make a documentary, and that's what they're good at. So, I like I said, I really just I failed to be presented with an argument that doesn't just come across as sour grapes as to why this is a bad thing. So yeah, good for him. Good on him. I'm rooting for him. It's going to be a tough year in the championship for him, I expect. But I said that about League One too, and ate my words on that one. So who knows? Dream the dream. Why don't you?
There was I wrote it down, kind of the quote. It was in the very first episode, and something I forgot, but I was looking at my notes here, and it was about halfway through the first episode where Ryan and Rob finally get to the race course, and they're out on the turf, and they're kind of walking around just talking, and they're contemplating the investment and what they have to do and how committed are they going to be, and Rob McElhenney says basically something like, there's a version where this doesn't work out and we end up being the bad guys, and they kind of think again in the context of we got to make this work. And Ryan Reynolds says, fuck that. Like we're doing it. We're making this work. And Rob's like, yeah, fuck that, and just kind of goes to their attitude. Like, we're all in to try to make this work. And I think some people take that as, well, they're just doing it for themselves. Okay, maybe, but why can't it be both? Why can't you also do something for yourself along the lines of doing something for the community? I don't understand this binary kind of attitude, especially when they're supportive of each other. It's not like one is taking away from the other, but they're each leveraging things to help with that. Certainly this whole idea of Welcome to Wrexham so far, right, has certainly put Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney in a completely different light in a lot of people's eyes, in a very positive light, I would say, in a lot of people's eyes. Maybe for some people negative, but why is that necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah.
But it's also something, as an investor and owner of a club, you could better make sure it works.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't and you do sell out, then that follows you also.
Yeah, and like we said, if you've watched the show, I find it really hard to believe that you could come away thinking that these guys are really just in it for themselves, and I say that actually, and not to get too nerdy here, but I say that as somebody who actually feels pretty strongly that the fame that Rob McElhenney has garnered from this Welcome to Wrexham show has pretty much ruined his writing for It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. Because now he's like a celebrity who's hot and ripped, and people see him that way. And it's just totally changed the way he writes his character in Always Sunny. And so I feel I've personally had my life, depreciated by this Wrexham project. And yet I'm still all for it. So what does anybody else have to complain about?
Well, I think I saw one episode somewhere along the way of It's Always Sunny. Didn't catch my attention, so I've never gone back to watch it, any of it.
It's the anti-sitcom. They're all horrible people, and that's what's funny about it. So
there's some shows about horrible people that I really can get into and I like, and there's other shows about horrible people that it's cringe and I can't.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
As total aside, but Seinfeld, I used to love Seinfeld for the most part, but some things that George Costanza's character would do, I'd have to turn it off. It was so cringeworthy that I was like, I can't do this.
Yeah, totally fair.
And that's just me. There's some things that they rub me the wrong way, and they no longer become funny. It's a fine line for me along that route. I don't know.
Yeah, totally fair. It is interesting though, because I know I'm not the only Always Sunny fan who feels this way too. There's a very clear like line in the writing where it's like,
Mm,
oh, all of a sudden he's not as self-deprecating as he once was, you know, and so he's not putting himself in the ridiculous situations he once did.
got it.
Yeah. Anyway, that's totally different direction, but yeah.
All right. Well, the last thing I'll mention just about the show that ties back into our previous segment about what happened with SDFC, and I think we had talked about this very recently. Maybe it was today before our show. And I'm on that episode about hooliganism in that first season, and Ryan and Rob. Now, I don't know because they easily can sanitize things, and I don't live in Wrexham, and I don't follow, so I don't know what other potential problems are there. But I can speak to is what they talk about there in the show, and how as owners and as leaders from the top down, they they made it very clear that that kind of behavior was not acceptable. Like you're going to have to decide whether you want to like step on board and move the direction that Wrexham's going, or maybe find somewhere else to be. But be like, you're welcome, but that behavior is not welcome. So again, looking at that, it's a very clear distinction, like of what to do, right? How of a choice you can make. I guess that's what I want to say is, again, it's all about choices. So when you're faced with these situations, what choice do you make? In this particular series, they chose this is not acceptable and made that part of the culture all the way down.
And I would argue that their atmosphere and club culture has not only not suffered for it, but has actually been bolstered for it. They've got a really, really special thing there at the race course, and they don't need violence to get it there.
Right. But and for some people, that will never be for them. They will say that they've sold out, that they're not a true soccer culture. And again, I would go back and ask some of those people, just a curious question asked, why if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But why are they not a true soccer culture? Why the need to gatekeep what other people are doing that really has no bearing on you? Like it.
I would
And
also
again,
like to remind these people where the game of football comes from.
yeah, well, I mean, and even that to me is not like, because it is celebrated differently around the world. Different countries have different cultures. Different teams within the same city have different cultures of their supporter groups. So, there's a place for everyone.
I'm just saying, trying to gatekeep one of literally the oldest clubs in the world about being a real soccer club is a little bit silly. That's really all I meant to imply there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, I think maybe we've kind of hit that, at least on that point. We will talk about Dorking Wanderers in a future episode, give people some links and some other information about that if they want to go check out that club and the documentary series. You can find it on YouTube. A Bunch of Amateurs is the name of the group that puts it together. The soccer club is Dorking Wanderers, and they are currently in the National League. So tons of episodes and stuff out there on YouTube. You can search for them and find it. I did want to give out one, actually, first thing I want to say, just kind of our call to action. So our question of the week we'll go back to. We've shared our thoughts about Wrexham and the Wrexham phenomenon. We'd like to hear yours because we might share those on a future show, maybe when we talk about Dorking Wanderers. So use that text link if you're listening to us on the podcast. There should be a link there in the show notes that says send us a text. So click on that and send us a note as what are your thoughts about Wrexham, or you can leave them in the comments on the YouTube channel. And then I also wanted to leave everyone with a podcast recommendation. So besides the Is What It Was podcast that we mentioned before, Protagonist had, and if you don't follow Protagonist, they cover a lot of lower league soccer stuff on their channel. But they had part 1 of an episode. I don't believe part 2 has come out. It might come out today. I don't think I checked today. But with an author, David Kilpatrick, and it's called 95 Theses on the Reform of Soccer, something along those lines. And I think the book came out a few years back, 2022, I believe. But it was an interesting conversation of someone who has done a lot with soccer and soccer history. So you kind of get his background, and they tease some of the things he talks about in his book. And Dylan, I'd like to put that on our ever growing books of our reading list to kind of go through, and maybe something we can talk about again. So if you haven't had a chance, I recommend that Protagonist Soccer. Check it out on your podcast feeds. The episode is with Dr. David Kilpatrick. There will be 2 parts. Maybe by the time you hear this, both parts will be out, talking about the 95 theses for soccer reform. All right, Dylan, do you have anything to add?
No, I think I've got it all out.
Yeah, went a little bit long here with the extra stuff. So thank you, everyone. Dylan, especially, thank you for staying along. Everyone else for following along. You got any plans this week coming up for soccer, or what to watch on soccer? We're kind of at the end of our European seasons, so
yeah, I guess we've got the Conference League final tomorrow, and then the Champions League on Saturday, so I'll probably tune into that. But yeah, other than that, not really. Getting into baseball, it's that time of year, so
yeah, that time of year. Yeah, I'm probably gonna take a little bit of a break coming up this weekend from some soccer. I've been, I think, indulging quite a bit lately, so may do that. But I know the Total Soccer Tournament TST is coming up here. I think it starts a week from Wednesday. You ever watch that?
Yeah, I've tuned in here and there. It's entertaining, but I don't know. It's not really my jam.
Yeah. All right, we may talk about that a little bit next week. All right, I think that's about all for us. As a reminder, we are here every Tuesday at 6 o'clock live on YouTube. You can join us there and comment in the chat. You can also listen to us on all major podcast feeds, and usually the show is up by Wednesday each week. We also partner with partner with San Diego Punto Football. I always get that wrong. We partner with San Diego Punto Football. Their podcast, it's called Two Balls and a Mic, airs Mondays at 8 o'clock. And if you want to go even further into the events of this last weekend with the post-match activities of the SDFC match, along with information about WAVE and all the other soccer teams and major soccer happenings around San Diego County, go ahead and listen to the Two Balls and a Mic podcast. You can always join them live Mondays at 8 p.m. as well, or follow them on all major podcast feeds. And they had a special announcement this last week. Did you hear that? They're doing a special project with Craig Elston and the Padres Hot Tub podcast. So,
cool.
Again, I hate this. This is my, long COVID cognitive problems and just trying to remember things. I always blank out. Has Chrome in the name. Can't remember what it is, but it's Craig, it's Tony, and here I go, forgetting everything. Should have written it down, but there is a new project coming along, and I think they're going on Thursday nights, if I believe. So you should look forward to that if you want news specific about SDFC. That's what they're going to focus on in that podcast.
Sounds good.
Okay, and then for us, you can follow us obviously here on YouTube. You can follow us on Blue Sky at soccershorts.bigbinddigital.com. You can also find all our back episodes of our documentary series Soccer Shorts on our YouTube channel. That's at BPD for Big Bind Digital, at BPD Soccer Shorts. And I think that about wraps it up. Dylan, thank you very much for being here tonight, and we'll see you next week.
See you then.